Your higher self is not a feeling that you arrive at. It's a thinking level that you activate. And the reason it hasn't changed your decisions, even after years of practice, is that nobody gave you the architecture for crossing how you currently think to how it actually operates. So you journal, you meditate, you visualize, and the experience is real. The frequency shifts, and the mood lifts, and the intention gets set. But the decision still comes from your current self. The boundary doesn't hold. The launch doesn't happen. The conversation doesn't take place because the spiritual state and the thinking level are two completely different things. And you were only ever taught to access one at a time. You see, most people don't understand that there's a gap between your higher self and your current self. This is the gap. And here's what nobody is teaching you. You see, every conversation about the higher self points you outward. Journal until you feel it. Meditate until it speaks to you. Visualize it until it shows up. You see, nobody told you that the gap between your current self and your higher self is not a spiritual distance. It's a cognitive distance. The practice works at the surface level. The feelings are real. The shifts are real. But the decisions, the actual output of how you think, are still being generated by the same operating system you had before the practice. You see, you don't need more feeling. You need a different thinking architecture. And there's a specific tool, one most people already have, that can simulate that architecture in real time. And nobody is using it for this. I mapped this pattern out myself and across the many other entrepreneurs and founders that I work with. And one of the things that I noticed while working with these individuals, every time a real decision arrived, a boundary that needed to hold, a launch that needed to happen, a conversation that needed to be had, they defaulted back to their current self. Not because the practice wasn't real. It was because there was no architecture for translating the spiritual states into a different thinking level. The gap had a feeling, but no structure. And what I kept seeing across every single one of them is the same thing. The moment they were given a structural way to access how their higher self actually thinks, not feel it, but actually think from it, the decisions changed. What I'm going to show you today is that architecture and exactly how to use AI as the tool that makes it accessible from exactly where you are right now. So here's what we're covering today. So we're going to go over the aware observer archetype. So this is the archetype that I call the aware observer, and this particular archetype is someone who is deeply committed to growth. This is someone who can clearly see who their higher self is, that version of themselves that moves with certainty, that holds the boundary, the one that makes the call. And every time a real decision arrives, they freeze, they wait, they default back. You're going to see exactly why. And if you're honest, you're likely going to recognize this pattern in yourself. The second thing that we're going to cover today is the architecture. So for here, I'm going to show you exactly what's happening inside of this gap, where you have two thinking chains, two different processing structures, and the specific reason why spiritual alignment alone cannot close the distance between them. This is the mechanism that nobody's talking about. And then third, we're going to walk through AI as a perspective simulator. I'm going to give you a reframe of how AI actually works in this context, not as an answer machine, not as a journaling tool, as a perspective simulator, a way to access the thinking level of your higher self, structurally, deliberately, regardless of how you feel in the moment. Okay, so let's talk about the aware observer. This is the first thing that we're going to cover today. So the aware observer is genuinely committed to growth. They journal, they meditate, they do deep vision work, they reflect on who they're becoming. They know themselves better than most people ever will. And they're not stuck because they lack clarity about who they want to become. They can see that version clearly, the future self the higher self, the version of them who moves with certainty, clarity, self-respect. But the moment an actual decision arrives, raising their prices, ending a client relationship that's straining them, launching the offer they've been building for months, having the conversation they've been avoiding, they freeze and they make the reactive choice every time. And when you ask them what happened, they typically say something like, "I know my higher self would make a different decision. I just can't seem to access that version of me when I actually need them." And you see, that's where the problem is. That's where this gap is here in terms of the aware observer has been practicing to receive their higher self. But here's the problem, and here's the actual thing that they need to be doing. They need to access its thinking. This is the biggest thing here, okay? You are not trying to receive the higher self. You want to access its thinking at any moment's notice. Because if you're trying to receive your higher self, that's passive, because you're waiting, hoping that the feeling arrives before the moment passes. Accessing is architectural, it's deliberate, a specific process that works regardless of how they feel. Because your higher self is not just a feeling that you wait for, it's a level of thinking that you learn how to enter. And if you cannot access that level under pressure, the old identity will make that decision for you. So your higher self is not just a feeling, not just a feeling that you wait for. It is, or it's a level of thinking that you learn how to enter. So your higher self is not just a feeling that you wait for. Like, you cannot wait for it to just have it be there, okay, whenever you need it. It's a level of thinking, okay, that you can access at any given time. So it's a perspective shift. It's a lens shift, right? It's a level of thinking that is elevated versus you just waiting for a feeling that's going to give you what you believe, what you think is your higher self. So here's the structural definition, and this is the lens that everything else runs through. So for your current self, you go into thinking, and this goes into decisions, and then you get results. This is the chain here, because your current self has a certain way of thinking. It has a pattern, and that specific pattern generates specific decisions, and those decisions produce your current results. And so for your future self, this is the chain here. So future self, thinking. This can also be higher self, future self, okay? Because your future self is essentially your higher self, right? Like, these are both kind of interchangeable. And then from your thinking, you go and you make decisions, then you get results. Your higher self has a different thinking pattern, different decisions, different results. The gap here is not in what you know. It's not in your spirituality. It's not in your commitment. It's not in how much you journal. The gap is in how you process. So let me put this here. So the gap here is in how you process, not in what you know. Very important here. How you process. It doesn't matter what you know. This is the gap here, okay? In terms of why you even have a gap in the first place, because you're not processing and accessing the higher self from a different thinking pattern, from a different thinking level. Think about it this way. You cannot solve a problem from the same level of thinking that created it. You already know this, but most people try to access a higher thinking level by feeling their way into it. Feeling is a result of thinking, not a gateway to it. You shift the feeling by shifting the thinking pattern first. And one of the most powerful ways for us to simulate having access and thinking from our higher self is using AI. Equals perspective simulator. And this is super important because this reframe changes everything about how you use this tool. Because the beautiful thing here is that with AI, you can ask it, simulate how my higher self thinks about this. Think about the power of that, on how you can ask AI different questions, different perspectives, and you can tell it about yourself, and you can ask it, tell me and simulate myself as my higher self, and tell me how they would interact, how they would engage, and how they think about this particular situation that I'm going through. You see, AI cannot become your higher self, but it can simulate the perspective if you give it the right prompts. And to fully maximize AI as a thinking partner and as a perspective simulator for you to be able to access your higher self, what you do here is you don't ask AI for answers. You ask it for a thinking level. And this is the most powerful way for you to be able to access your higher self using the power of AI. Okay, so now we're going to walk through the higher future self access system. So let me go ahead and erase the board here and we'll jump right into that. Okay, so the higher future self access system. And this is an acronym here. This is 5 steps. So let's go over each one of these. So the first one here, H. You want to highlight your current situation. So before anything else, you need to name the actual event, like what is happening. This is the raw event that happened, that is not a story or narrative that you're telling yourself. This is not an interpretation, okay? This is not he said, she said. It's like, hey, somebody did this to me. You know, simple example, I got into a car fender bender, okay? Somebody rear-ended me. What happened, okay? And not what you think happened, your interpretation, like what is the raw event that happened, peeling back the layers of the onion with no emotional tie or connection or narrative or interpretation. Very, very important here. So let's write this out. So for this, what is actually happening? Or what happened? Okay? In terms of the event, the situation, the circumstance. This is the observable facts. This is stripped free from the story that you have, okay? And from this, the way you can look at this is, so let's say you have 2 different people here, okay? Both of these people are talking, and maybe it's you here, okay? You're talking to person B, you're person A, you're here, this is you, this is another person, person B, and both of you got into a fender bender, okay? Maybe he or she rear-ended you, and then something happened to your car, and then there's this big issue, right? You want to take this third person perspective, C, and you want to see the entire event, removing yourself from it. You're just like a spectator. You're just seeing it, and you're able to see exactly what happened without any emotional tie. And something really important here that I want you to keep in mind and remember for the foreseeable future is that your future self, or higher self, let's go like this, higher self, sees the event, right? We think about this third person perspective. This is your higher self. They are seeing the event without being attached to it, involved in it. Your current self lives in the story that you tell yourself, the interpretation. So step number 2, we want to go to I and identify the desired identity. And this is where you're not looking for a specific outcome, right? Very, very important here. You're not looking for an outcome of the problem, okay? A solution to the problem. You're looking for being able to access the identity, which is the specific version of you that's already navigated this before, okay? So they've already gone through this problem. They've already overcome it. They've already, did this, done that. It's a done deal. They're on the other side of it, okay? So let's go right here. You're A, and then the identity, the higher self who's already navigated, they've already gone through this whole gap here, right? This bridge here, and they've crossed into section B, and then now they're the ones that you want to access the level of thinking from, right? The one that's already navigated everything and done this whole entire process already. And for this, what you want to ask AI is you want to say, describe the version of me who's already moved through this. How do they think, decide, and respond in this exact situation? And this is very important here because when you're typing this into GPT or Claude or any other AI tool, you're not looking for a feeling, you're looking for a thinking pattern, okay? How do they think, decide, and respond, okay? This is a thinking lens. This is a decision architecture, a way of processing the situation. So for this, you want to remember to describe the identity, not the outcome, okay? Very, very important here. Step number 3, G. You want to generate high-level perspective. So here, what you're doing is you're asking AI, after you've described the version of me who's already been through this and navigated this, you want to say, respond to me as that version, right? So you gave it the context understanding of, here's the version of me that has already navigated this, okay? Now respond to me as that version. Very, very powerful here. And then clear, decisive, and aligned. Here's my situation, okay? And then here, you break down what you're going through. We went through the example of here of getting into a fender bender, right? So iron out and lay out your situation of what it is that you're going through. And here's something really important that I want you to keep in mind is that throughout this whole process, you're not asking AI to decide for you. You're asking it to think from the identity that you specifically outlined and defined. Because for this, you're not asking for advice, okay? Let's go right under here, block this off. You are not asking for advice. You're accessing a thinking level. This is very powerful. So if you think about it up here, let's go in the corner right here and draw different levels, okay? Each level. If you're down here, 5, or level 1, level 2, level 3, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, you're normally accessing things and seeing things from level 1 and 2. But what you're doing is you're accessing the higher version of yourself, and you're able to see things from number 5 up here, the meta awareness, where you're able to see the entire playing field from up above, right? Think of yourself as being out there outside of space, in space, and being on like a satellite and being able to see the entire world, right? From up above. You get multiple different angles, lenses, perspectives, where your box is expanded. You know, early, perhaps in your whole journey, you're likely only thinking from this limited box, okay? Where when you expand the thinking level, now your box is expanded. It's a huge box, okay? It's massive. And you have more opportunity here, more resources, right? More of an ability to access thinking levels and perspectives that you previously weren't able to access because you didn't know how to be able to connect and access to your higher self through AI. But now you do. Let's go to step number 4, H. You want to hear the response with full presence. So for this, you want to ask, where am I thinking too small or avoiding the action that the version I described would already have taken. Now, this is super important here, and this is where most people corrupt the entire framework, because most people are using AI for comfort, for validation, instead of expansion, because the temptation is to ask your higher self to validate what you already believe, to ask questions that you already know the answer to use AI to feel good about the decision that you've already made. If the response doesn't challenge you, it's not your higher self. It's your current self with better vocabulary. Make sure you ask for the friction. This is where the perspectives actually live. Step number 4, E. You want to evaluate the gap. This is where you want to name the specific distance of how you're currently thinking and how the identity that you defined would actually think. So for this, you want to ask, what is the gap between how I'm currently processing this situation and how my higher self would process it? And the big thing here is that you want precision, okay? So perhaps you can add in here, make this super precise, like very specific, super on point, because precision is the beginning of change, okay? The more that you can get precise, the more that you can get more specific and very much so on point, the better you're going to be able to evaluate the gap and really understand where that gap is between you and your higher self thinking. So let's go to the final step here, R. You want to respond with aligned action. This is where you want to act immediately. You don't want to wait for the feeling. You want to immediately act from the identity that you've accessed, not the one that you arrived with. So for this, what would my higher self do in the next 24 hours? And what is the first specific action? Then from here, you want to close the loop. You don't want to write another prompt. Don't keep the conversation going. Don't add more reflection, because when you're here, it's very easy to ask follow-up questions, additional questions about this, about that. The biggest thing here is that you want to cut through the noise and you want to find out and figure out, what is the one action that I need to take within the next 24 hours, okay? Super important here. And this will allow you to have the aligned action as you're going through this. And more importantly, the aligned action with speed. So let's recap what we went through here. So we want to highlight your current situation, like what's going on, what actually happened without involving your story, your narratives, your perspectives, okay? And then identify the desired identity, okay? What desired identity does that look like? The future self, your higher self, okay? Describe that. And then generate a higher level perspective, okay? Respond to me as that version of myself that is that higher self, okay? And then give it the situation. And then hear the response with full presence, okay? Where am I thinking too small? Like, where am I avoiding any interaction? Where am I avoiding accountability? Like, where am I placing blame on somebody else when it's probably more likely going to be something that I did or something that happened because of me, right? Evaluate the gap. What is the gap between how I'm currently processing the situation, right? And how my higher self would process this. And then respond with aligned action. You want to respond very quickly, as soon as possible, to whatever action is recommended, right? That is aligned. I want you to ask yourself something. What decisions have you been waiting to feel ready? What would change if you stopped waiting to feel like your higher self and started accessing how they think? Where are you using more reflection as a substitute for a decision that you've already made? What is one situation right now where your higher self's thinking is available to you through the higher system? You see, your higher self is not waiting to arrive. They are not something that you earn your way towards. They are the thinking level that is already available to you. You're not waiting to become your higher self. You're waiting to think like them. Start there.